Good morning and welcome to week too many of Dale Street Online Church. And it really is too many weeks now since we've been together. Now the only consolation I can take from this prolonged break is that I'm kind of hoping that by the time we do get back to normal, you might have forgotten that I promised everybody a hug. Anyway, today we're going to look at the final part of our current Who You Say I Am series. Now up to now we've heard how sons not servants, heirs not aliens, priests not paupers, disciples not deserters, and last week, soldiers not sufferers. And finally this week we're going to look at how we're witnesses not wanderers. And as I was kind of sitting down to prepare this, it kind of struck me that I was going to say interesting, maybe it is interesting, maybe it's not, and maybe it's natural given the nature of everything going on and how much it's on our minds. But so many of the subjects that we've looked at over the past few months, they seem to be really appropriate to this current situation. And I don't suppose these things really are coincidences when the Holy Spirit's concerned, but once again this week the kind of subject does seem really appropriate to what we're facing right now. You know, one of the biggest dangers that we face during this enforced time apart is that we lose our focus on God. We drift apart, we develop the wrong habits, you know, we drift apart as a fellowship. You know, Sunday becomes just another day of the week. Maybe we start to like the new relaxed Sundays where you don't have to get up and put on your Sunday best and kind of go out of the house, and you know, it's a much more leisurely start to the day, start to the week if you like. And we lose that weekly focus on church. And then that makes it much less likely that we'll have a daily focus throughout the week on God. And if we lose that focus, then it's far less likely that we'll have any effect for good on those around us, those we meet. We're much less likely to witness to people. And these things are even more important given that our interactions with others, our time spent mixing with others, is already far less than it would have been this time 4 months ago. Now, if you can remember back a few weeks to the last time you had the pleasure of me doing these videos, I spoke about the Great Commission and how we're called to go out into the world and preach, and kind of discussed about how preaching, not only talking about preaching the gospel to everyone you see. And we're going to kind of carry on that thought a little bit today, and I'll try not to repeat myself. I don't think I repeat myself. Maybe I do, but if I do, then it was worth saying twice. The verse we're going to look at today is Acts chapter 1 verse 8, which says, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere, in Jerusalem, throughout Judea, in Samaria, and to the end of the earth." But I actually want to read kind of some of the verses around there too, from Acts chapter 1, looking at verses 6 to 11. And the events taking place in these verses, it's post-resurrection, obviously. Jesus has been around for about 40 days now at this point, and he's getting ready to go back up into heaven. And in verse 6 it says, "So when the apostles were with Jesus, they kept asking him, 'Lord, has the time come for you to free Israel and restore our kingdom?' He replied, 'The Father alone has the authority to set those dates and times, and they are not for you to know. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere, in Jerusalem, throughout Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth.' After saying this, he was taken up into a cloud while they were watching, and they could no longer see him. As they strained to see him rising into heaven, 2 white-robed men suddenly stood among them. 'Men of Galilee,' they said, 'why are you standing here, staring into heaven? Jesus has been taken from you into heaven, but someday he will return from heaven in the same way you saw him go.'" See, the disciples here at the start are still looking to Jesus to free Israel from Roman rule. With the resurrection, they'd finally grasped that Jesus was the Messiah that they'd been waiting for all these years. But they were still thinking too small. They were still expecting him to restore the kingdom to Israel there and then that had been taken away by the Romans and Herod, and for Jesus to take his place as king. Nothing could stop him now. He'd proved that. He'd risen from the dead. And Jesus rebukes them, not for the first time in the New Testament, but only fairly gently, to be fair, and then he makes them a promise that they will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon them. And then he goes and gives them a commission. And you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere. Jesus knows that they still don't quite get it, but he also knows that the Holy Spirit will change that. And in the same way, this isn't just something that's happened to the disciples, Jesus' followers who were there at the time. We've also received the Holy Spirit. And along with that, we're subject to that same commission, that same command to go out and be witnesses. Now, you might be thinking that the coronavirus pandemic means you've kind of got a bit of a get out of jail free card at the minute when it comes to witnessing and sharing the gospel. We're all isolating to some degree, maybe not as much as before, but we're still not mixing like we were. We're limited on who we can meet, how much contact we can have with people when we do meet them. So it's rare to have conversations with people as much as we used to. And everyone that we talk to is kind of more concerned at the minute about kind of COVID-19 and things like that anyway. That's a more pressing concern to them right now, you'd think. But actually, there's never been a better time to be a witness for God. Now, I was reading that apparently there's 3 of the largest Christian websites. They say that the number of people seeking online information about knowing Jesus has dramatically increased since early March. One of those sites, Global Media Outreach, they saw a 170% increase in searches about finding hope, a 57% increase in searches about fear, and a 39% spike in searches about worry. There's also a University of Copenhagen study that reports that searches about prayer in 75 countries skyrocketed to their highest levels in 5 years during March. And all of this points to there being a massive need for Christians to step up right now as witnesses to those many people out there that are seeking help and seeking information, who are desperate. And as well as there being more of a pressing need from people for us to witness to them, in many ways it's also never been easier to actually be a witness. Maybe you find it difficult talking to people about God, not being sure of what to say, not being sure of how to start the conversation. Maybe a bit shy. Maybe you just don't have the confidence to do that. Maybe you feel awkward inviting someone to come to church. Maybe it's not always convenient to invite people to church, or at least not invite people to your own church, because maybe they don't live near you. But nowadays, many conversations that we're having are happening electronically. There's text messages, it's messaging, it's over social media, it's there are many different ways, and that should make having a nervous conversation easier, because you don't have someone in your face kind of looking at you. You've got time to compose your message, you've got time to think about it, you've even got time to look up information. Not only that, there's so much church content is online at the minute, not just here at Dale Street, but there's thousands of churches around the world. So it's never been easier for someone to sample a bit of church than it is right now. They don't even have to leave their house. So rather than having to invite someone along to a physical church, which might be scary for you, but it's also perhaps scary for them to go into that building for the first time, to face an environment that they're maybe not comfortable with, they're not familiar with. Now, just send them a link, just point them in the direction, and they can view the content at their own leisure. And they can come back to you with questions if needs be. And you don't have to worry about knowing all the answers there and then, because you can research for it. You can ask others for help, for information, before replying. So it really hasn't been this easy for a long time. And there are many reasons why it's important for us to share our faith. I mean, firstly, Jesus sets the example for our lives. He regularly shared his faith and challenged those he met and talked to them about these things. We've got the woman at the well, Zacchaeus, Nicodemus, there were many others. Jesus was the light while he was here. But now it's our turn to pick up that torch and to shine brightly in the darkness of the world. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says to those in attendance, "You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." And that applies just as much to us as it did to those there at the time. Secondly, we were specifically entrusted with this mission. As we read in Acts 1 verse 8, "And you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere, in Jerusalem, throughout Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." And there are other verses with similar entreaties that we are to go out and spread the good news. The destiny of the entire human race was placed in Jesus' hands on the cross. And now Jesus has passed that baton on to us and placed the destiny of other people's lives into our hands. And there's nothing more valuable than a human soul. In Matthew 16 verse 26, Jesus said, "And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world, but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul?" Thirdly, as we've said, it's the Great Commission. It's not the Great Suggestion. The Great, well, if you can, if you've got a minute, if you find the time. And as I've mentioned it's not just mentioned once either. Mark 16 verse 15. "And then he told them, 'Go into all the world and preach the good news to everyone.' Matthew 28:19. "Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit." And again, the verse we're looking at today, Acts 1 verse 8, "And you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere." Commands are given to be obeyed. Jesus commanded us to go. Have we obeyed? Lastly, Jesus gave his life for this work. That's how important it is. It's so important, God sent his Son, his only Son, to die on the cross. And now it's our turn. But we're not being asked to give our lives. I mean, sure, there are some Christians over the years that have been martyred for their faith. But, realistically, that's something that we're unlikely to have to face personally. For most of us, the worst we'll have to face is maybe an awkward conversation. Maybe someone will laugh at us or, ridicule us. That's likely to be the worst we face. Can we say that we truly love God if we're not prepared to carry on the work for which he sent his Son to die? And if you're still not sure that this witnessing business is for you, don't forget about the promise that we've talked about already, about the Holy Spirit. And Jesus' promise, a promise that he gave to the disciples, a promise that holds true for us too. Now, around 10 days after those events, and that promise was made, the event that we know as Pentecost occurs, where the disciples receive the Holy Spirit, and it changes them. It empowers them. No longer are they the fairly clueless followers of Jesus, constantly missing the point and getting things wrong. Powered by the Holy Spirit, they took the message of the gospel and spread the news to the point where nowadays there are around 2.5 billion Christians in the world. Now that's pretty impressive. I mean, it said there were something like 120 people there at Pentecost. There were 12 disciples to start with. And that's multiplied up now to 2.5 billion Christians that are living, and plus all those that have already died. There's billions and billions of Christians, all that have stemmed from that small group of people who were given the Holy Spirit and who obeyed the command to go out and witness and to spread the good news. That just shows you the power of the Holy Spirit. And that Holy Spirit resides in every believer. The power that enabled these 100 or so people to spread this message out into billions, that exact same power, not a watered down version of it, that exact same power is in us too. Now imagine if you had a friend who worked in vaccine research and they came to you one day and they told you that they'd finally cracked it. They've developed a vaccine for COVID-19 and they've produced enough vaccines that everyone in the world can have one. All they've got to do is go to an address and pick it up, and they'll get the vaccine and they'll be saved from coronavirus. Now, would you keep it to yourself? Would you go, oh, that's nice, and get on with your day? No, you'd be straight on the phone to your family, your friends. You'd be announcing it on social media to anyone who cared to listen, going around to your neighbours, telling them about it. I imagine you'd probably stop everyone in the street you met. You know, going around the supermarket, you'd be stopping people saying, "Oh, Papa, this address, go there. They've got a vaccine. You can get rid of your mask. Life can go back to normal. We're saved from coronavirus." You know, at work, in the hairdressers, in restaurants, some of the few places that are open. You'd be telling everybody, wherever you went, wherever you might be. You'd be telling everyone about this great news that a cure has been found, and you'd be telling them what they had to do to receive it. But you know, as bad as COVID-19 has been and still is, there's something far worse in the world. Something that's caused far more suffering, far more death. Something that we don't even need a test for to see if we've got it, because everyone has it from birth. But also, as terrible as that thing is, there's also a simple cure that is already available to all who ask to receive it. And we know all about it. We know what that message is. We know what that message is that people need to know. And we should be shouting from the rooftops and telling everyone we meet in exactly the same way as we would about a coronavirus cure. Because this is far more important. You know, the verses we read earlier go on to say that Jesus, after saying this, he was taken up into a cloud while they were watching, and they could no longer see him. As they strained to see him rising into heaven, 2 white-robed men suddenly stood among them. "Men of Galilee," they said, "why are you standing here staring into heaven? Jesus has been taken from you into heaven, but someday he will return from heaven in the same way you saw him go." Now, the disciples here have got their eyes on heaven, and there's nothing wrong with being focused on heaven. You know, we sing many hymns about how great it's going to be when we get to heaven, and it is going to be amazing. We should be excited about it. We should be looking forward to it, but not at the exclusion of all else. We shouldn't be wandering around in our bubbles, safe in the knowledge and comfort of our own salvation, knowing that, well, that's it, great, we're saved, we don't need to worry about anything, we'll just twiddle our thumbs and kind of just mosey on through life, waiting for the time that we'll get to heaven. You know, someday Jesus will return. He'll return from heaven back to earth. And in the meantime, we have a mission. We've been given a command to spread the word, to share the good news, to be witnesses and not wanderers. Thanks for listening this morning. I hope you, if you haven't already, enjoyed the rest of the content we have on the website for you this morning. And if you have any questions, then please do get in touch. There's a form you can use, or there are email contacts on the website too, and someone will get back to you as soon as possible. Take care and stay connected.